We broke a Guinness World Record just a few short years ago, and we were the very first monster truck in the world to go 100 miles an hour. And it was so cool to be able to be the person in the driver's seat and get that record, especially because there were so many crew guys and people that were part of our industry that really played a huge role in making that record happen. Now, what was so cool is as we were preparing for that run, we did not know what a 12,000-pound monster truck was going to do by hitting triple digits. It's not made to go that fast. It's not that we had highly engineered tires that were spec'd for a 100-mile-an-hour pass on an asphalt concrete track to be able to go out there and propel a 12,000-pound truck that quickly. But we said, look, if we do a couple of these things and make a couple of these changes on that truck, we really feel confident that we can generate that level of speed and take the record, and most importantly, keep that 12,000-pound truck together. And so we had a lot of conversations about how are we going to start the run? How are we going to accelerate the pass? How are we going to build up to that speed? Because the gears inside the drivetrain of that truck are so big that when you get them turning that quickly, we don't know what kind of stress and strain we were going to put those gears under because nobody had ever hit a speed that quickly. The record before we broke it was 97 miles an hour. And so we knew we had a chance to propel it that quickly to hit those triple digits, but we did not know if the truck would 100% stay together. And so we were a little bit nervous heading into that run. And we were really kind of thinking through and trying to figure out the unknowns. Because so much of what we do in life is all about understanding the cost, not just of what we do know, but a lot of times of what we don't yet know. And so when they came to me with this idea to break this record, I said, hey, that's great. You guys are saying no one's ever gone 100 miles an hour. I'm saying no one's ever crashed a monster truck at 100 miles an hour either. And so all of the safety and the preparation for months leading up to this moment, we had so many conversations about how we could do it safely. Now, when we broke that record, I will say my reaction to seeing 100.3 miles an hour pop up on the scoreboard was so incredible because I never grew up thinking that I would ever be in a Guinness World Record book. That was not something that I dreamed of as a kid. I used to love going through the Guinness World Record book. But the fact that we got to set that Guinness World Record was so incredible. And then the first time I got to flip to that Guinness World Record book where we actually made that page and see Bryce Kenny and the Great Clips Mohawk Warrior truck breaking the all-time speed record at 100.3 miles an hour, it was such a surreal moment. And so I think it's so cool to think about what that moment provided for our sport because it elevated what we knew would be possible in one of these 12,000-pound monster trucks. But we also understood the cost if we did not hit it. Because it would mean that our industry would never be able to surpass that 100-mile-an-hour mark. It meant that we would stay stuck in doing what we've always done as a sport and just saying, look, we build these trucks to jump high and do cool stunts, but not for speed. Those things were at stake. And instead of being stuck in the past, we were able to accomplish that record, hit triple digits, and elevate the industry to a point that they had never seen before. And so I love thinking about the cost of things as much as the reward of things. And that moment had a very real cost, not just for me as the driver in that truck, but every single person that turned a wrench or played a role in making that record happen. It was so cool thinking back after we set that 100-mile-an-hour Guinness World Record speed pass in a 12,000-pound monster truck to think about the preparation that went in to making that moment a reality. Because we didn't really understand what a 12,000-pound truck would take in order to hit a top speed because these trucks were not necessarily built for that. They were built for cool stunts and backflips and huge jumps and coming back down to earth and landing as softly as possible. And so we had to think through what modifications could we start to make this record a reality. And so we started to look at the tires. We said, how can we get the freshest set of tires that have the most true tread on them, that are not going to wobble going down the track? We got the straightest chassis that we could find, so it had not been through a whole lot of crashes and tumbles where maybe some chassis bars weren't entirely perfectly straight. We looked at all of those elements in an engine to say, if we're going to propel it to 100 miles an hour, we have to build the most power that we possibly can in order to make that record a reality. And we're doing all of that on concrete. These trucks are used to running on dirt. And so would there be any sort of traction issues as we tried to make that record a reality? But one of the things that we could not control was the weather. We made this attempt in Florida. We decided, we'll do it in the cool of the morning because it's not going to reach triple-digit temperatures, and so we can do it in a cooler part of the day. However, we learned very quickly that that's one of the most humid parts of a Florida day, is in the morning. And so we went out there, and the water grains in the air, it's one of the things that we measure in creating horsepower in engines, is how much water is in the air. Because we want oxygen that gets pulled into that engine to create a lot of power. Well, think about a glass of water. If half of that is water and half of that is air, you don't have the maximum amount of air and oxygen available, right? Well, it works the same exact way in our atmosphere. And so we wanted a very low number of water grains per square inch in our environment. Unfortunately, it was so bad, it was the same as if we were in the middle of a rainstorm. That's how much water grain and humidity was in that Florida air. And so we were struggling to pull oxygen out of the air and down into that engine to create the horsepower to make that record a reality. In fact, we had a couple test passes the day before, and we could not even break the 97-mile-an-hour record. And so we came up with a game plan on how to create that power sooner in the run by getting that engine to turn quicker, which means we were just going to basically be way more aggressive in the first 150 feet of that run, of that race pass. We were going to be way more aggressive to get that supercharger working harder to pull more of the air down into the engine and get more speed more quickly instead of waiting toward the finish line to create the maximum amount of speed. And it ended up working. And so we went out there the morning of the actual record attempt, and we finally hit it. And we hit 100.3 miles an hour, the first ever monster truck to go triple digits. And it was such a moment where we all got to kind of lock arms and hold each other on big bear hugs and just say, guys, we did it, because the preparation is what paid off. And it created that strategy for us to find the right gear in order to set a Guinness World Record. Now, for the run itself, it's so hard to even explain what going 100 miles an hour in a 12,000-pound monster truck really feels like. But the best way I can describe it is it felt like I was in a paint shaker at Lowe's. Have you ever seen that when you get a paint shaker going to mix a can of paint that you want to take home and paint your walls with, and it's shaking all over the place and all the vibration? That's how it felt for me inside that truck. And it was very loud, and it wasn't as loud just with the engine. I mean, the 1,500 horsepower engine that was screaming going down that racetrack, but it was also the vibration from the tires and those massive tread elements coming off of those giant tires that weigh 600 pounds each, going against that track and obviously making noise as well. Now, for me, the steering, I could feel every bit of that vibration coming through the steering wheel. And as I went through the finish line, I remember thinking that all of my eyesight, I could see right between the track lines, but the actual peripheral vision of my eyesight was going away. They call that tunnel vision in racing, and the big reason for that is because when things are a little bit more violent than normal, your brain in the peripheral vision section of it is unable to make out what is going on that peripheral vision, and it starts to kind of go into like you're in the middle of a tunnel. That's where the term tunnel vision comes from. And so it was so crazy for me because as soon as that pressure of the moment went through the finish line with me, it totally subsided. Not when I saw the result of actually breaking the record, but when I knew that everything we had put into that moment finally paid off, and understanding that we did something that no one else was able to do up until that point in history. And so it was very, very cool for me to think about the difference between pressure and fear in that moment. Because I could have focused on, well, yeah, no one's ever hit 100 miles an hour before, but no one's crashed at 100 miles an hour either. That's a thought in the back of your mind that creates a level of fear if you allow it to. But instead of thinking about that and the destruction of what could have happened to that truck if things went wrong, I allowed it to turn into pressure and turned that pressure into performance. And what that looks like is saying, hey, there's pressure to this moment. The lights and the cameras are all pointed at you to try to see if you're going to succeed or if you fail or if you crash. However, that pressure that I'm feeling right now, I'm going to turn it into preparation. I'm going to think about a new way to drive it, a new way to get more power out of it. How can I prepare for a worst case scenario? Whatever pops up, I'm going to turn that pressure into preparation and that preparation into performance. And that's exactly what we did. And so the moment I knew that we had the record was when they brought me all the way back from the end of that drag strip to the finish line where all of the Discovery Channel cameras were, and that moment for us to celebrate the win together. And I did not know what we hit. I did not even know if we broke it until I started to park the truck where they were kind of lining me up to come in and park at. And I saw a buddy of mine off to the side, and he was pumping his fists in the air. And that's when I knew I had it, because the drivers knew, all of my buddies, the ones who were out there trying to break their own Guinness World Records in different competitions that day for our live channel event on Discovery Channel. But that was something that we wanted to just celebrate together. We wanted to have those moments together. And so I looked back over at those drivers. They were pumping their fists in the air, and I knew that we had broken the record. And that was one of my best memories and fondest memories of the entire experience. Most leaders think that pressure is the problem, but I don't. Pressure is usually your body preparing you to perform. What leaders are actually experiencing is uncertainty. You see, they don't know what's about to happen, and so they mistake that feeling for pressure. And driving a 12,000-pound monster truck at 100.3 miles an hour and walking onto a stage in front of 5,000 people to give a keynote, those two things, they feel very surprisingly similar. My heart races before both, but that doesn't mean that I'm in any danger, does it? It means that my body knows that that moment matters. The trainable part isn't eliminating pressure. It's reducing uncertainty through preparation. And so that's why one practice I recommend is just asking yourself before every important meeting, hey, what's the one thing that I can prepare today that's going to make tomorrow feel more familiar? And every time that you answer that question, uncertainty starts to shrink and confidence starts to grow. And what once felt like pressure starts feeling a lot like readiness.